So, Heather Moday, you are so welcome to Livsenergy channel.
It is great to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you and your audience today.
Wonderful. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Moday is fine. Yes, that's how I say it. So
Good. So you're here because we have a book to launch together in Sweden.
I know. That's so exciting.
Yeah. Do you want to see it?
Absolutely. I'd love to see the cover.
So here it is.
Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful.
So it is beautiful. And you can see it's a little bit, I don't know if you see it. So the number 4 is in lacquer. Right?
I see.
Lacquer? Yeah, it's partial wax.
Mm-hmm.
So the Swedish title is The 4 Immunotypes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's so interesting about the 4 immunotypes. That's actually what sold the book to me.
Oh, well, I'm glad it was something. I mean, I think it's rather novel. When I was coming up, I wanted to write something. And when I really started thinking about it, I thought about really individuality when it comes to humans and patients and people. And it was 4 obvious sort of, types or imbalances that came out after I, thought about it for a few weeks. And yeah, it was great.
So it's actually your way of describing the immune system in different ways and individualize them.
Yes, it's, there are types that are based on symptoms or, characteristics, I would say, of people. And, it's changeable, obviously. But as people present, today, how they are, what is going on with their immune system, and how can you potentially improve that by getting things more balanced? Because all of these types are a little imbalanced, right? So they're not all terrible. We all sort of fall into one. But there are ways to improve your immune system through these lifestyle, changes.
Yeah. So this is your book that came out approximately 1 year ago.
Yes, I think it was published here in the United States December 22nd or 21st last year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember that. And I found you not through my ordinary channels, but actually through Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was my own kind of scouting out there.
Thanks for finding me. That's wonderful.
And the thing is that it's actually a kind of good topic to raise here, because the immune system, or the immune system, was on my how do you say it was on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's on a lot of people's minds those days and a few years back. And perhaps if we want to take it even a bigger approach, it's been on everyone's mind for the last few decades.
I would agree. I think that, and that's, I think, for a few different reasons. One being that the whole field of immunology throughout the world has just exploded. I'm going to say probably in the past, let's just say the past 30 years, just because of the technology, more so than other fields, because we really didn't know much about the immune system until, 50 years ago, or, and I think all the technology with, the DNA and, just what we're able to see at the cellular level, because everything's so invisible. And there's just been discovery after discovery after discovery. And then that's informed so many new drugs, medications that are given, and therapies, and cancer and everything, that I think that all of a sudden it just came to the forefront. And then, of course, having a massive worldwide virus pandemic, also sort of brings it to the forefront of just the regular person on the street, right? So
yeah, of course. Yeah. So I'm 48, and going back 20 years from now, I was very interested in health subjects and eating well, and I tried everything, diets and stuff like that. And about that time, in my world, everyone spoke about boosting your immune system, do this to be well. And, we were young parents and we did not want to fall sick and so on. And that focus was so, how do you say, it was so, it was a tight focus for a lot of people in my neighborhood, at least.
Yeah.
And so back then, I didn't really think about it. But today, when reading your book and talking to people, it's obvious to me that we don't function the same, right? But
right.
why haven't we even talked about this before? What do you think?
It's hard because, inherently, we all sort of have the same machinery, right? I mean, there are a few exceptions to that, obviously, but mostly our immune system is relatively the same from person to person. There might be some slight differences between biological sex. So, obviously men and women have slight differences. There may be some, I don't think that there's any sort of racially based differences at all. I mean, I think if you're a Homo sapien, you're pretty much the same. And then of course, some people are born with some genetic issues, deficiencies and things. Those are really pretty rare. So it's really, if you think about it, how we form throughout life. So what is and I talk about this in the book, but a lot of our immune system or immune strength or health is very dependent upon our very early development in the world, even to the point of, how we were born. So we get, children when they're born have very weak immune systems, or I want to say weak, but underdeveloped, right? They haven't really developed an immune system yet entirely. And so a lot of the protection we get is from our mother. Obviously, if you're vaginally born, that's the best, because that, of course, helps your microbiome and your gut be really fortified. And then, of course, breastfeeding is really crucial because those are like your first antibodies. So all of these things are important. And then, of course, as I talk, everything from what did you eat as a kid and what were you exposed to as a kid? Where did you grow up? What was your stress or trauma levels, throughout life? And that continues to go really till we die, right? I mean, all these things are important. So I think we've always known that, very basic things in childhood help form our immune system, but I don't think anyone's really talked about like, well, can you, is this something you can also do later on in life?
Yeah, no, I guess so. But still, yeah. So we'll dive deeper into that in a little bit. But you know so much about this. Who are you really? Where do you come from? What do you have in your backpack to know so much about the immune system and our health?
Well, I always tell people I'm not I'm not a research scientist, right? There's many research scientists out there that's all they do is study immunology. My training was in medicine. So I got the very basics, here in the United States, and probably in Europe too, is you take immunology as part of your medical school training. But then after that, you go and do whatever you're going to do. It's just sort of something that you learn a little bit about. But here as well, probably as in Europe, you can specialize in something, when you finish medical school. So what I did is after medical school, I did a residency in internal medicine. So that's basically, general adult medicine. But then I also did a fellowship for 2 years. And that fellowship was focused on the immune system and very much so on allergic diseases or allergies, right? So that's what I did, but very much in a clinical setting. So working with people who had, immune and allergic issues. So, and I did that for many years, but most of the treatments were focused on medications. So using things to, for allergies to sort of get rid of them or decrease symptoms. We had some immune patients too that we had to treat with different medications, but none of the stuff that I write about in the book was really anything that I did back then. And so, flash forward a few years, I got very interested in more holistic or integrative medicine and integrative health. And part of that was because I read about it for my own interest, and I started reading and thinking like, oh, I should be eating differently. And I was really into nutrition, but I really didn't know enough. And so I did another fellowship after I was about 10 years out of school in integrative medicine.
Mhm.
And integrative medicine just sort of pulls together everything from nutrition, your environment, spirituality, everything like that together. And then also discusses things like, are there more natural methods, either herbal methods or, nutritional methods, or even things like, acupressure, acupuncture, anything that's like a bodily therapy to help people be healthier. And so after that and some other training in functional medicine, I started my own practice. And so that sort of was, in a nutshell, how I sort of got to the place I am now, because even though I have this more traditional medical background, I sort of left that world and started doing all of this. And, really now I just learn by reading and going to conferences and things like that.
So curiosity, right?
I'm a very curious person. I would say that's my greatest strength is I have endless curiosity. I wish I had like 9 lives. I would probably do many different things in my lives. I'd be a designer, a lawyer, or whatever, but I love medicine and the human body. It's endlessly fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And with all the knowledge that you have about it, you probably live until you're 150 or something.
I hope so. I am not perfect. Everybody has their weaknesses and, life gets in the way sometimes. I try to be balanced. I think that's important because I also see that, and I see this a lot here, especially through social media, is that there are some people that are extremely stringent with their lifestyles, and to the point that I think it becomes almost like an obsession.
Yeah.
And I think that's very unhealthy.
I was there and I am very happy to get out of it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that balanced lifestyle. And and then you get off track at that sometimes as well. You have to find your way back to something that's more balanced than.
Yeah. I think the key is, for me anyway, it's like, I think having a strong why as to why you're doing something. Because in the moment, sometimes you don't feel like, eating the kale salad or getting up to go for the gym or whatever it is, right? There's always something else that's, more appealing. But, I think when you get the positive feedback from how you feel later on, or you have a very compelling why as to why you're taking care of yourself, then it's easier,
What is your why?
I think I want to age well. When you're young, you think, oh my God, 60 or 70 is so old and it's not going to matter. I don't care, But then when you get closer and closer to, you realize, well, really, you can be vibrant and living a really full life, for a long time. But if you don't take care of your body, that's not the case. And, I think especially here, I think the United States, we don't have as much respect for elder people as I think other cultures and other countries do. That, and this has been actually borne out through studies that we have more of a negative attitudes towards older people. They're frail, they're sick, instead of like they're wise and important. And, I do think that we, in our medical system, we don't focus on prevention. And so Unfortunately, we have a lot of really sick people when they get older because they haven't taken care of themselves. They eat terribly. They've lots of stress. They don't exercise. They become obese. And so, we have a lot of sick people in their older years. And so, they end up in nursing homes, or they're confined to wheelchairs, or they're taking 12 medications, and, that's no way to live. So my why is I don't want that to happen to me.
Good why. Yeah. I haven't thought about my why. My why is it's more short term. It's like, I want to be better at this. So let's focus on becoming strong or whatever,
Right.
And but it's true. I'm, closer to 50. I'm actually thinking more and more about, okay, so who do I want to be in 10 years and 20 years?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because here we are, and we're going to be here in 20 years as well, if everything goes well, and it will.
Yeah.
What made you write this book? The Immunotype Breakthrough is the original title for it. What made you write it? Did you see a gap in the market, or in the demands, or in the needs? What did you see?
I did. I mean, it's funny because I was at a conference, sort of like a health conference, but it was, natural health conference, right? There are all these wonderful people there. Yeah, all these wonderful people, and they're really big in the field, and many of them are authors, and there's a lot of these sort of books out there, but I didn't know of any that were specifically about the immune system. And so I actually met my book agent there. We started talking, we kept bumping into each other, and so we started talking about books, and she said, yeah, she's like, have you ever thought of writing a book? Because there's not really anything like out there, specifically about the immune system written for like the layperson, and I said, yeah, I have. I said, but I said, I didn't have the idea yet in my brain. And so, several months went by, and, I was researching and looking around, and I was like, yeah, everyone's, they talk about the immune system, but no one's really getting into the meat of it. And everyone's just talking about boosting it. And that's like, that doesn't really tell you very much. It's so much more complex than that. So I started, I just really started brainstorming and thinking about how I think about the immune system and what I know about it and how I see people present. And I came up with these immunotypes, and, we sort of played around with it. And then that summer, actually, it was right after COVID broke here, is when I put in the manuscript, and then it was just, off to the races. I had just a few months to write the whole book, but it was great. Yeah, because it was amazing to me looking around that no one else had written something like this. And it was, I think there was like one on Amazon, there was one book about the immune system, and it was completely different. So, yeah, that's sort of how I got there.
And what do you think? What do you, if you were a reader for the first time you read this book, what do you hope that person will take with them for life?
Well, I think an understanding a little bit more of their own body, because as I mentioned in the book, the immune system is really hard to pin down, and it's not something that people are really familiar with because you can't really see it. I mean, you can't see it. Everything is microscopic. But everyone knows what it feels like to be sick. Everyone knows what it feels like to be inflamed, or to injure yourself or whatever. Everyone knows that it's there, doing this job. So I think one was to sort of demystify it a little bit and break it down into simple terms, because I always think, like I said, I'm a curious person. I want to understand how things work, and I know a lot of people want to do the same. And I think the other is to allow people to understand that that they actually do have control about the health of their immune system, and that these are things that you can do. Because I think a lot of people just feel like, oh, well, I don't know, what my immune system is my immune system, and there's nothing I can change about it. And that's not true either. So those were sort of the two reasons.
So some people probably think that you're born with one immune system and that's your luck, or not. Would you say that's correct?
I would say that most people do think that. They'll say, I have a really strong immune system, or I have a really weak immune system. But that is changeable, right? So you can certainly weaken your immune system, as many of the things that I talk about. You can get pretty sick by doing certain things or not doing certain things. And same goes the other way, because, our immune system is constantly reborn. Like the cells in our body, like all those immune cells, they're constantly cranking out, and they're dying, right? They die, we make new ones, and we can change really the strength and the balance of the immune system really on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. There may be some things you can't overcome. For the most part, for the average person, you can change things in a positive way.
Yeah, that's really good news, Heather.
Yeah.
So just how far can you take this? Can I take this? Can I do so well so I can get rid of my Hashimoto's, for example, an autoimmune disease? Is that possible?
So in some cases it is. And we have seen, many people reverse autoimmune activity or significantly decrease their flares, their symptoms. Usually, or I would say, you have to, whatever you change, whether it's you start improving your sleep, or you start changing what you eat, or you remove things from your diet or whatever, those have to remain permanent in order for you to sustain that health, right? So that's one thing. It's not like, you do something for 6 months and then you go back to whatever you were doing before. But yes, you can. And that's not always, everyone's different, obviously. So it's not always achievable. But, what I do clinically is I do work with a lot of people who have autoimmune issues, or who are getting sick all the time, or very inflamed, in different, and really, changes that people make over, say, 6 months to 12 months can really change their lives to the point that, they feel great and they can get off medications and their lab values improve. And so, yeah, you have a lot of control.
Yeah. Just by knowing a little bit more about your immune system and the immune type that you might have then.
Yeah.
So should we just spit it out? What are the 4 immunotypes?
So the 4 immunotypes are smoldering, misguided, hyperactive, and weak.
Yeah.
And, I think, there is a quiz in the book.
Thank God.
That you can take, and you will find that you tend to predominate in one immunotype. Now, some people might straddle 2. That's not uncommon. And a lot of that has to do with, inflammation in general. Although it presents differently in 3 of them, there is a underlying trigger that causes inflammation in both smoldering, misguided, and hyperactive. So, but then what happens is the immune reaction changes, and actually you end up with very distinct characteristics and symptoms.
So can we go through them very quickly, each and every one of them, and just take a few keywords to?
Sure. Yeah.
So
smoldering. These are people or types that tend to have. It can actually be sort of low level inflammation, and that's why I called it smoldering, because a lot of people don't realize it necessarily. They might have sort of aches and pains. They might have, rashes. They might have hypertension or high blood pressure, high blood sugar, arthritis. all the things that people will say, oh, I'm just getting old, I'm out of shape, sort of like this low level inflammation. And I would say that this is a really common one because certainly lifestyle, like whether you smoke, what kinds of foods that you eat, if you drink lots of alcohol, like if you don't sleep or you're very stressed, a lot of people fall into this category, especially here in the US. I mean, this is like there's a lot of obesity here. So this is a very common immunotype. And really people's tissues are just constantly slightly inflamed, and the immune system's trying to, sort of put out fires, but it sort of can't keep up. And so that's the smoldering immunotype. The other misguided is what I call people who have autoimmune activity in their body. So they could either have a full-blown autoimmune disease, so something like a rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or something like that, or it could be something quieter like a Hashimoto's thyroiditis or antibodies against maybe psoriasis, or that's not really a good one, but it can be mild. So there can be a real range, but the keystone is that in those people, their immune system has lost what we call immune tolerance. We're supposed to tolerate our own tissue. We're supposed to ignore it and never attack your tissue. It's like the cardinal rule of the immune system that when we make new cells, new lymphocytes, T cells, they go through a screening process. They are actually eliminated if they recognize self tissue. They get killed. So that's a really important thing. And so for different reasons, sometimes that deletion doesn't occur, and we end up with a immune reaction against different tissues. And there's probably close to 100 different kinds of autoimmune diseases. And so they vary widely in their presentation and severity. But anyway, so that's misguided, is really inflammation or reactions against your own tissue. Number 3 is hyperactive. Mm-hmm. Hyperactive is not it's an increased inflammatory response, and also creation of an increase in different cells and different what are called cytokines and things and antibodies, but they're directed against things that are generally outside the body that are not harmful. And so, for example, our immune system always should be, of course, reacting to things like microbes, viruses, bacteria, anything that can potentially harm us or kill us. However, things like benign things like tree pollen or cat dander or even foods, right? These things generally we should be tolerating because they're not going to kill us, right? But somewhere along the line, something has happened that our immune system recognized these things as a threat. And so we create this whole allergic response. So these are people who have lots of allergies, asthma, even eczema, food allergies. They're having a hyperactive response to something outside of their system that's not necessarily a threat. And then last is weak. This is the only immunotype that is actually sort of going in the opposite direction. So it's obviously people are able to mount an immune response, but they may have an inadequate immune response. So it may be sort of sluggish or slow, or say they get a cold, they have it for a longer period of time. It goes into a sinus infection. They get frequent infections. They don't respond well to vaccines, things like that. So this is a sort of a weakened, sluggish immune response. Some people are born this way genetically, but that's, like I said, extremely rare. Most of the time this is brought on again because of lifestyle issues and things like that. And this is the one immunotype that you want to boost, right? These people need a boost. So that's, those are the 4 types.
Wonderful. So if you want to boost your weak system, what is it that you want to do with the others? Like, of course, it's boosting in different ways probably, but is it more of,
So you want to, in some, for some of them, you want to calm them down, right? And so, for example, with the smoldering, this would be the most obvious because they're actually having fairly adequate, immune responses to things, but they've got like inflammation everywhere, their arteries, their joints and things like that. So for those people, you want to reduce the sources of inflammation. And so people like this do really, really well with changing their diets. So, for example, say they're eating a lot of processed foods, or they're eating a lot of sugar, which is extremely inflammatory, or they're eating a lot of, industrial fats and seed oils and things that, we know that things like trans fats are very pro-inflammatory. Or maybe they're not getting enough of the good foods that have a lot of antioxidants. So things that can actually sort of scavenge free radicals and prevent inflammation from occurring in the first place. So those people do really well with that. They also need to really work on movement, because over time, exercise is, very anti-inflammatory. They want to reduce their fat stores because depending on the type of fat, but if they have a lot of abdominal obesity, that can be, those fat cells can actually secrete what are called adipokines, which is they're basically pro-inflammatory chemicals from fat. So, losing weight and also sleeping. So people who they skimp on sleep, that's really important for decreasing inflammation. We need to sleep, a good amount every night. And so I would say that those people are a little bit easier to reduce inflammation and get more balance relatively quickly.
Yeah. They can probably see different areas of their lives that are easy to just do.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they respond very quickly because their immune system isn't really misdirected or hyperactive they might have maybe mild allergies or things like that. There might be a little bit of a, but that their main issue is that, they live this very inflammatory lifestyle and, even small changes make a huge difference.
Yeah. I bet there are many misconceptions and myths about the immune system. Do you want to just, do you have 3 to 5 misconceptions that you know about that are, top of mind?
Well, I guess the first one, because we sort of talked about it, is the fact that everyone needs to boost their immune system, right? So that's not necessarily the case, and it's not necessarily a good thing for everyone. So, for example, if you have an autoimmune disease, you may not benefit from something that's going to, let's say, increase the, strength of your antibodies, because, you may have antibodies that you don't want to strengthen, or, to maybe take something that increases certain cytokines, which are, these chemicals that our cells talk to each other with, right? And it may not necessarily hurt them. It's just not going to make them better, right?
So I would probably do a lot of things and don't get any results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's that. I think the other thing is that we can change things, right? So we sort of talked about that too, that we are not stuck in this we can never change our health, like we don't have control over it. We do have control. And many people who say go to their doctor, and this is one of the things that frustrates me. For example, many people will go to their doctor and maybe they have been diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, and they'll say, well, doctor, what can I do differently? What can I do differently? How can I change, let's say, my diet, right? To maybe to improve, my symptoms. And I will say across the board, unless it's a very enlightened medical doctor here in the US, they will say, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. Just keep eating whatever you're eating. Like, don't that's never going to help you. The only thing that's going to help you is to take this very, very strong drug. And I'm not against drugs. I think obviously they can be life-saving and very important, but so I think that understanding that you have a great deal of agency in how your symptoms are and how your disease progresses. So that's number two.
Yeah.
Sort of more is not always better. As I said before, is that sometimes things that you don't seem to think about make a huge impact on your immune system. Like you don't always have to be going. You don't have to be doing everything perfect. You don't have to be running marathons or just eating, vegetables all day long. Like, sometimes your body, sometimes when you get so stressed out about or obsessed with your health or your state, that's not good for you either. And sometimes just making sure that you're, having good quality time with your family or your friends, or maybe taking naps, or, working on your spirituality or your self-care, like that can go a tremendous, distance in terms of actually helping our immune system. So I would say that's really, really important.
So when you say that, can I just ask, because in this book, we have lots of, I don't know if remedies is the best word for it, but still tools to work with our immune system in the way that probably serves us the best. And it's supplements, and it's lifestyle changes, it's diet, and it's a lot of things. So from what you just said, is it true or is it okay to interpret that as, so you can actually, you don't have to do it all at once. So if you just take some steps, try it out and see what happens. If it works with your lifestyle, step by step, again, try something else, and all of a sudden you have changed your lives your life in a year or two, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think everyone's a little bit different in the way that they take on, let's just say, habit change or, changes in their life. I mean, some people are like gung-ho, very black and white, like I learned this and now I'm going to do this every day, and I'm not going to do that. And that's it. That is not how I would say the majority of people work. Most people have to be, sort of convinced over time. They have to see the benefits. They have to sort of like dip their toe in the pond of wellness. Right. So, and I would say that that's the case for me, for sure. I need to sort of prove to myself that something is going to be beneficial, or I'm going to feel good. And I also think it's so easy for us to get overwhelmed from information. I mean, I get that way, and I know that my patients get that way. And that is really due to the amount of information that's available to us. I mean, the internet's been around for a long time, but just the explosion of people talking about, giving advice about this, that, the other thing, and it can make your mind spin. And so, I tell people, listen, you are an individual. What works for someone else is not always going to work for you. And you have to look at the science, and you have to look at the proof. And that's what I tried to distill out, things that we know have data for, like, most people, right? So you start with one thing, or you look at your life and say, well, actually I'm doing pretty well on my dietary, like I really pay a lot of attention to my diet, and I think that's pretty solid, but God, my stress is out of control. Like, I'm overwhelmed at work. I have no boundaries. I don't have enough downtime. I don't give myself enough time for creativity in my life. Like, that is an area that I really think I need to work on. And so you start there, you start with the area of your life that you feel like you can benefit the most from improving.
Yeah. And stress is one thing that I think a lot of people would agree on. Well, yeah, that could actually impact my immune system. However, letting myself be more creative, or just doing things that I love a bit more often than I do today. Would you say that I think that I would need to hear that from someone like you, that that can actually change your immune system to the better.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
I wouldn't believe that.
well, I mean, we know that, for example, there is data on looking at everything from, let's just say, getting out in nature, right? So, getting out in nature, unplugging, but also just being, around live living things, right? So going for a hike, or, in Japan, they call it forest bathing, right?
I love that.
We know that that actually helps decrease our cortisol. And so cortisol, though it's an extremely it's funny, it's a hormone that's very anti-inflammatory in nature at first, but chronic elevations in cortisol through chronic stress work to actually imbalance our immune system, and over time can damage it, and make it weaker, and actually dysregulate our inflammatory responses. So, yeah, you may not think about, the fact that going for a hike every weekend or taking your morning walk is important, but it is. And also part of that might be things like doing breath work, right? So we know that that improves our balances our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is, wired right into our adrenal glands and our cortisol responses. And so something like that is really imperative. And so, again, it's knowing that it's not necessarily a luxury, and over time can make a huge impact.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. And we need to hear it, because a lot of our members in this audience, they love to do that stuff. And if we just know that, well, I think it's good to just sometimes get confirmation of that your lifestyle is good in certain parts. And then there's always parts that you can improve.
Yeah. And, it's a constant, I don't want to say it's a constant battle, but, we go through life, and people are always going to have difficult situations that come upon them. You lose loved ones, you have financial stressors, things happen. And it's not your fault. It just happens. But if we have tools and we practice those tools on a regular basis to de-stress, to sort of change our thoughts around a situation, that's what really is the thing that you learn. Is you don't learn necessarily you don't all automatically get a life has no stress in it. That's impossible. But you might find ways to maybe, avoid stressors that you might bring upon yourself. And that might be, your job. It might be being around certain people. But you also bring things into your life, whether it's practices or events or things that actually help with stress.
Yeah. So if we were to kind of, on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is the immune system to our health?
I think it's a 10.
Good. Okay.
Well,
So we should actually care.
We should care. I mean, 'cause this is the thing, right? Of course, I mean, you could say your brain is important and your heart is, because we can't live without any of these organs. However, the immune system affects every single tissue in the body, right? So it's anytime we have a disease, whether it's a true infectious disease or whether it's a disease of anything from cancer, autoimmunity, really anything, heart disease, the immune system is part of that process. So, because inflammation is like it's a key thing that we do every day, constantly. We turn it on, we turn it off, because it's what we use to heal the body and to repair tissue. Then if it becomes chronic, we actually have tissue damage, right? So, I mean, really, if you look at almost every disease that we have, the immune system's there. And so if you can have a healthier, more balanced immune system, you're less likely to, have problems either clearing infections or getting infections, or, also you're going to have less disease in general.
Yeah. So if we don't today actively work with our immune system, are there a few things that you would say, okay, so start this way?
Yeah, I mean, what I do is, first of all, take the quiz. That always gives you a sense of like, well, where am I, right? And if you see that there's a bucket that you fall into, that's the good place to start. And then you can use some of um the recommendations that I give. But also you can look at, sort of the pillars that I write about. So, your diet or nutrition. I don't like to use the word diet, but nutrition, your sleep, your stress. I don't have a whole chapter on exercise, but you can talk about movement and also your gut. Although not everybody who has problems with their digestive or their gut necessarily have obvious digestive symptoms. But if you do, if you're bloated, if you don't feel like you digest your food, if you have heartburn or diarrhea, constipation, if there's things that just don't really work, right? You can pretty much know that you need to work on the health of your microbiome. So those are the big ones. And then, there's a whole chapter also on environmental toxins and how that plays into our immune system too. So you can just look around your house, like, what am I putting on my skin? What am I drinking? What am I eating? What am I cleaning my house with? What am I exposed to? And that might give you a sense too of like, is this a problem? Do I need to look into this?
Yeah. That's very true. So would you actually, what comes to my mind right now is you can actually make your immune system your kind of hobby, your
Yeah.
and bit by bit start changing things in order to support yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something that needs to happen overnight. And, like I said, I think with habit change, at least for me, sometimes I need the proof in the pudding, right? So as they say, so let's just say you decide, everyone talks about meditation and you've just never really tried it. Or if you did, you tried it for a day and you never really gave it a good solid try. So maybe you give yourself a challenge and you say, okay, I'm going to challenge myself for 30 days. I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes and I'm going to do some meditation. All right. I'm going to start and it doesn't matter if I don't feel like it's working at first, I'm just going to do it. And you do it for 30 days or more. You give yourself a period of time and then look back or think about like, how do you feel now? Like, do you feel like it's helped you? Does it help you sleep? Does it help you deal better in difficult situations? Most people are going to say if they give themselves that time to sort of play around with that, they will say, you know what? I never really stuck to it before. And so I just gave up. But when I did stick to it for a period of time, I started noticing that, yeah, like maybe I didn't have arguments as much with people, or maybe I was just more patient with people or patient with myself, so it's like, give yourself a little bit of time, give yourself a challenge. And I would say the same could be for anything. It could be for, exercise. It can be for changing, maybe taking sugar out for 30 days. Like, how do you feel? How do you look? Things like that.
I wish I could take sugar out for 30 days.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I like sugar. I guess, I don't know if I'm not wired that way, but sugar is not a driver for me. Like, I think there's other things that I prefer, like, either salty or, things like that, starchy things. But some people are very, very much driven by sugar, but because sugar it changes some of our neurotransmitters, right? So it actually increases dopamine, right? And everyone wants more dopamine. It's like our pleasure, one of our pleasure neurotransmitters. So, there's science behind that, why people crave sugar, right?
Of course. And yeah, well, I'm trying to quit. Maybe not quit, but at least have a better.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have you had any personal situation where your immune system failed you big time?
I wouldn't say anything catastrophic. So I'm lucky that, I've never developed an autoimmune disease. So that's a big one. I don't have terrible allergies. And I've never gotten seriously sick. This is all knock on wood. My digestive system is pretty good. However, I have to say that there were times I would say for me, stress plays a huge role. In probably when I do get sick, I would say that's probably the biggest trigger for me. And for example, starting in medical school, I had never had cold sores, so cold sores are driven by herpes virus, very common. Everybody has
The ones that you get around your mouth?
Yes. So most people have been exposed to herpes simplex 1. It's different than the others at some point during their life. And so some people have recurrent outbreaks. I do not have that, but I remember in medical school, the first time I was about, 25 or something. And I was studying and I was probably eating badly too. At the time, I was probably eating like ramen noodles and bagels because I didn't have any money and, drinking a lot of coffee and staying up late and whatever. And I just remember I had this massive outbreak on my face. And that is directly, it's usually triggered by stress and sometimes by other things. But so that I do find that if I am under a lot of stress, it will happen maybe once a year or once every 2 years. So I would say that is something I know I have to sort of keep in check. I think that sometimes sleep gets really affected by stress, and I know that I can be very sensitive to that too. So I know that for me, I have to really protect my sleep. I'm very strict about, trying to go to bed early, not having a lot of, I really adhere to the light exposure, turning off electronics and things like that. So for me, I know that these are my sort of personal weaknesses. I don't have as much of an issue of sticking to a pretty wholesome diet, because that to me, I feel is easy because I actually really like a lot of those foods,
You
So
tend to learn to like them also if you eat them on the warm.
you really do. And, you also learn how to make them. This is, I think, a big trigger, and it might be from your family of origin. Like, did you learn how to cook growing up, or like, what did your mother and father make for you? And, is it something that you enjoy? And a lot of people just never had that. They grew up eating junk food and they grew up eating processed food, and they never really learned how to make food. And so they don't realize that, wow, vegetables can taste actually really good.
Exactly.
So,
I have 3 teenagers at home, 2 boys and 1 girl, and the boys it's so difficult to have them eat healthy. And I hope that one day they will wake up and accept it.
I think that does happen a lot. I see that quite a bit in my patients that are, even in their 20s, late 20s, they'll say, oh my God, when I was in college, all I did was like eat pizza and drink beer and, eat junk food and M&Ms and Doritos and, all these very like snacky foods. And, and I think because you're sort of more resilient when you're a teenager and a young adult, that, it doesn't bother you as much. And then when you start getting older, you start going, oh, I don't feel so good when I do that. You know what I mean? And you start to get this negative feedback. And then you also look around and you get more mature, obviously, and you start to see the benefits of eating healthier. And I think, again, that comes back to like that feedback that you get from your body and also the why.
Yeah, that's very true. And that you actually listen to the feedback that you get from your body.
Yeah.
Just not run over it.
Absolutely.
What's your secret to health, strength, and longevity?
I don't know if I have a secret, but I do think I've learned what is not good for me, and over the years, and so these are things that I try to focus on. So, for example, I think stress, right, is the thing that drives me to not take care of myself, right? So if I'm not doing things that fill me up, so when I am at my best, it's because I've put boundaries around my work. I stay off of technology. I don't read the news as much. Like I avoid things that are very negative or make me feel bad. And so I think for me is making sure that I really sort of protect my routine and I give myself time in my day to do things that are, self-care is sort of a word that's thrown around a lot, but, making sure I'm reading things that aren't related to my, what I do, like giving myself time to take a mental break, getting outside in nature, not sitting all the time. So for me, it's really trying to see my life as like, it's not just all about work. It's not all about, stringent rules and regulations. It's, giving myself time to have joy.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people don't have enough joy in their life. So, and people
That's
who
very
live the
true.
longest, when you look at these blue zones around the world, yes, they talk about, exercise and diet, but really some of the biggest factors are things like community, spirituality, feeling that they have a purpose in life. Those are some of the biggest driving factors. And we don't even talk about that.
No, for the big part of the world, we don't talk about it. But me working in this field with books about spirituality and self-care,
Mhm.
I can see that the trend is there and the trend is positive. So I hope that that's correct and that we actually can see more and more, people
Mhm.
caring about themselves and their inner journey.
Yeah, and I think that and I think that's something that obviously the recent pandemic showed very negative effects of being isolated, not being able to see people smile, because everyone was masked up, and just missing out on events and holidays and weddings, and not being able to see your friends, especially in children, right? So, and we're seeing the, basically the after effects of that, which is unfortunate. And so hopefully we've learned a lesson that, um if and when this happens again, that we have different policies around that.
Obviously,
Um,
you had a different experience than we did.
right.
Uh,
So Sweden did the open. You did not go under a lockdown. Yeah.
no, not in that way, not
Right.
in that harsh way.
Yeah.
But
Hmm. Hmm.
a lot of countries did. So we stuck out in the world,
Hmm.
and many politicians and people were very angry with us. But I'm happy that we did what we did, and
Yeah.
I don't know what you see in as after effects from it. Can you see an increase in psychological unhealthy people or?
So I just read it the other day, that it might have been a New York Times article, but it was referencing an actual study that, since COVID and the lockdown and people being, isolated, that they are less friendly and
Oh,
optimistic towards others.
mm,
Like it's actually changed how people interact slightly. So that's one. I think the biggest issue probably has to do with children. And we see now that, mostly education, and, obviously there's a lot of smart people in the United States, and we have a pretty good educational system, but I think we pale in comparison to the European system, that children who were, at home and maybe didn't have access to, really good education. So they're, maybe socioeconomically didn't have parents who could stay at home and homeschool them, or, they just didn't have the discipline about, doing the technology and going to school, virtually. They have fallen very behind in reading and math, like to the point that they may not be able to catch up.
yeah.
So that's one. And then, children, they learn, right, social cues and things like altruism you learn those when you're, in kindergarten and first grade. And so, to be removed from situations that you're learning socially how to interact with others, I think that's going to have a huge impact on, people getting on when they're older. So yeah, I think it's a problem. I don't, I know in some cases it was important, maybe for short periods of time, but I think it went on for far too long, and the masking went on for far too long. It wasn't necessary in a lot of cases, and now we're seeing this borne out by studies on transmission of the virus. And obviously in certain situations it was important, like in hospitals, but maybe not so much in other areas, especially for people who weren't at risk for serious disease.
So, but it's good though that they're doing these following up studies so that we can know and learn for the future. Otherwise, we would probably come up with a lot of different arguments to why we should do the same way, because we know that way.
Yeah, and I think, and hopefully that is the case, that these studies will persuade, because so much of this, of course, is political. It will persuade future administrations, government, to use the data that we have from COVID to generate policies that are better for us in the future. Yeah.
So a few short questions. So
sure.
I know before we started this recording, you just said that you moved to Virginia a year and a half ago or something.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
So it's a long story. So I was actually I wasn't born in the United States. I was born in Hong Kong. Many years ago, when it was still a British colony. And I lived there just, until I was around 6, because my parents, who are American, my father worked for an American company overseas. And so we lived there until he came back to the United States. And, it's probably hard for everyone to keep all the states in their minds, because we have 50 of them. But we first moved to a state called Pennsylvania, and we lived in a city called Pittsburgh. And then we moved to a state
almost in the middle, kind of.
It is. It's actually very far west. It's almost to Ohio. It's very far west. It's in a sort of, they get a lot of snow there. But it's an interesting city. And for a long time, it was a big, still big steel area, producing steel. And my father worked for an aluminum company. So we were there for a few years, and then we moved to Georgia. Georgia's in the southeast, right? Southeast. And, we didn't live in a really great area of Georgia. It was, my mother hated it. There was nothing to do. So luckily we got out of there after a few years, and then we moved to just outside of New York City. So everyone knows where that is. So I would say that when people say, where are you from? I would say I'm from New York, because I did most of my, growing junior high school, and even lived there when I went away to college. And I went away to college in Massachusetts. But I lived and worked in New York for quite a while. And then I went to medical school in Louisiana, in New Orleans. Most people have heard of New Orleans, which was wonderful.
Beautiful there.
I love wonderful city. The rest of Louisiana, not so much, but wonderful city. And then I went back to New York. I did my training there, to New York City. And then I lived in Philadelphia, which is another, big city in Pennsylvania on the East Coast. And then just a year and a half ago, I moved to Virginia. So I've moved around a bit, but I would say I'm mostly East Coast gal. I like the East Coast a lot. It just, you're either an East Coaster or West Coaster, I think, and I'm an East Coaster. So yeah.
And it's much closer to the rest of the world.
It is. It's much closer to Europe. So, I can go to London. I have a nephew who's actually in school at St. Andrews in Edinburgh, outside of Edinburgh in Scotland. So it's much easier for me to get to Europe.
Is he playing golf?
No, he's not a golfer. He's just at university there. He grew up in Brooklyn, and I guess, he really wanted to go abroad. So
Oh,
Yeah.
it's beautiful in Scotland. I
Yeah,
bet
it
he
is.
likes it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your family like? Do you have any siblings? Where in the sibling group
I
are
do. I have 3 siblings. I am number 3. I have 2 older sisters. We're all very close, fairly close in age, but 2 of my sisters live in New York City. One sort of splits her time between Connecticut and New York. One is a designer, interior designer. One is an attorney. And I have a brother. He's, sort of the black sheep. He lives in Georgia. So, but he lives near Atlanta, which is a large city. And he also was sort of on in landscape architecture. I definitely have some artistic people in my family, which is why I'm always trying to access my inner artist. My mother also she's older now, but she was an interior designer. And she and my dad, thankfully, are still alive, and they live in New York City too. So a lot of still New York bound people.
Yeah. And was it on your father's side you had some Polish background?
Yes, I did my DNA, background, 23andMe. You can do many of them now, ancestry.com, etc.
Yes.
And I am about 50% Polish. And my dad never did his, but his brother did. And his ancestry is 100% Polish.
Oh,
So they didn't, before they came to the United States, they did not move around very much. So I have a lot of Polish. My mother's side has mostly English and Irish, I think a little Scottish, but yeah.
I have never done that. I need to do it because I think it sounds so.
It's really fascinating. And now they've really, even from the time I did it, because my sister did it recently, they've really honed it down to they can actually see areas within the country of origin when you're most likely clustered. And so I have a lot of DNA from Krakow in Poland, which I think is really interesting.
Have you been there?
I have never been to Poland. I
I
want
was.
to go.
Krakow is it's a beautiful
I'm
city.
sure it's beautiful. I know my little nephew just went with his sister. They went to Gdansk on the coast. It looked beautiful. I've been to Austria. I've been to now what was the Czech Republic, and where else have I been over there? I've been to Budapest, and I've been to some other European countries, but I have not been to Poland. Would love to go.
Yeah, because just touching on the spiritual side of things, I'm thinking if we know more about our heritage, going that places
Yeah,
would
I think it's
may
important.
perhaps awaken something in you.
I think that's true. It's funny, my father does not speak Polish. I think his mother spoke some. His great grandfather was the one who came over. And they actually even changed our last name. So my last name is Polish, but it doesn't look Polish. But if you go to my grandfather, my grandfather's tombstone, it's spelled Madej. Now, obviously, and it was pronounced differently. But yeah, I think I would like to explore more of that heritage, and I think it would be really neat to go to Poland to do that.
I need to do this test. I hear you. So, what is your zodiac sign? When are you born?
Oh, I am a Leo. I was born
in August.
I was actually born at the very end of July. So the last day, July 31st. And so I'm sort of on the cusp, but it's funny. My aunt sort of dabbles in astrology, and so she did my whole chart about 10 years ago, probably. But I also have, for people who are interested in astrology, my sun sign is in Leo, but my rising sign is also in Leo. So I'm called a double Leo. And then my moon sign is in Pisces, which I think grounds me, because I think if I had all 3 in Leo, I'd probably be unbearable.
So do you recognize yourself in the double Leo?
I don't so much, because they Leos are supposed to be very like, I mean, there's some things that I like about, that they say Leos tend to like the spotlight, and they're exuberant, and they're extremely extroverted and social, and maybe even a little arrogant. And I actually wish I had a little bit more of that, because I feel like I'm very social, but I think I'm a little introverted, and I don't love to be at the center of attention. But I do love celebrations. I love bright colors. I like more things with a dramatic flair, even in like design. So I guess there's part of that, but I think it's my Pisces that keeps me, they say that's more of your personality or moon sign, or what sort of drives you. And so, I'm more intuitive and a little bit more of an observer. So I suppose it's a good mix.
Do you have a spiritual practice, or spiritual things that you do to?
Mm-hmm. I don't as much as I would like. And I've been interested in the past in, and I know spirituality is not the same as religion. But I'm fascinated by different religions. I went to India when I was in my 30s with my mother, actually, because my father did a lot of travel over there for his business. And I felt very touched or connected, because there's so many different religions, and I know they're having problems there, but they coexisted and still coexist for centuries, right? And it's just a big part of, whether it's Hinduism or Jainism or whatever, there's temples everywhere, and lots of I like that. It makes me feel very I don't know, grounded, or I do like sort of traditions. And so regardless of what you feel about religion, I think that it's really neat. Like, I grew up in the Catholic faith, and I was not a particularly religious, but even when I go to Europe and say go into a Catholic cathedral, that I can just sit there and feel very calm. I love sacred music. So I actually, around the holidays, I'll listen to like old ancients, like, chants and that type of polyphonic music. Like, to me, that it speaks to me. So, I like that. I wouldn't say I do anything on a daily basis, except for, I try to meditate. I try to listen to music like that. And like, be out in nature. That would be more of what I do on a regular basis. Maybe read something that's spiritual, whether that's, Buddhist, really anything like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's enough. It's not, we don't need to have a day in a ritual with woo,
yeah,
do this, do that.
right.
So, but it's nice to hear everyone has their take on
Mhm.
on the spiritual part of the life.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, as people cut themselves off,
Yeah.
they're scared to. I think because of the way spirituality is mixed up with religion, people get very up in arms about it, especially if they grew up in a family that whatever religion they grew up was something that they didn't feel aligned with, or maybe that's something that was even harmful to them.
Yeah.
And so then what they go is that they're like, oh, I'm, I'm atheist, and I don't like religion, and it's ugly, and I, whatever. And I'm like, well, it's not the same as spirituality. Like, your spirit has nothing to do with, necessarily someone else's religion. So
That's very true. Your spirit, you can't get away from your own spirit.
you cannot. You cannot.
So, talking about that, do you have a motto in life? Life motto?
I don't know if I really have a motto. I think, I've always loved, I don't know if it's Shakespeare, but who said to thine own self be true, right? Is, I would say, if anything, I really try to, and I think it's a struggle, to always go by what your intuition says to you, and not necessarily to listen to what other people tell you to do or to be, right? because we get so mixed up in that. I mean, I know that I did when I was younger, people telling you what you should do with your life and what you should do and what you should wear and how you should act. And sometimes it gets very, very confusing. And, and it takes sometimes getting to be an adult to figure out, like, if you're not true to yourself and to your feelings and to your intuition, like, you're always going to feel very disconnected, and never really truly happy unless you do what you need to do for yourself.
That's very true. So today you live in Virginia, and what are you doing there? You're writing books, and what are you doing there?
So,
Do you have a next book coming up?
So I have not written anything yet. It was a big move I moved about 6 months before the book came out. And the first, few months of this past year were, doing podcasts and promoting the book and things like that. And then, I had a practice in Philadelphia that was actually an office-based practice. And then when we did the big shutdown, I went to work online and continued to see patients. And so when I moved here, I did not open an office. I continued to, work with my patients online. And that's what I'm trying to do now, is to actually establish an office here. I will still, of course, see patients online, but so most of my efforts now are in trying to establish myself here in this community and meet people, and really just, because I came here not knowing anybody. So that's my big focus, but I am also brainstorming ideas for a book. So I would love to try to get something in the works, maybe by the end of the spring, early summer, and see how that goes. So, yeah.
We're looking forward to hear more about that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm, it's funny, I'm waiting to get inspired. And I think I would want, a lot of people write books that sort of follow up on their first book, but I feel like I'm going to write something different.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
A good idea. Yeah. We'd like another, this is a very practical book.
Yeah.
So we'd like something similar in another topic, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got a couple of things, brewing. It's just, I want to make sure that whatever I do write, that it's novel, that it's interesting, and it's not just a repeat of something that someone else has written. So maybe a clarification or just like a different viewpoint. So yeah.
That's so important. For me, it needs to stick out. I had a few immune type books not immune type books, but immune oriented books to decide from. And I took the one that stood out a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. I'm very happy. And I'm really honored that you enjoy it and that you think it's important. So hopefully your readers will like it as well. So
do you want to end this interview with just saying a few words to your new Swedish audience?
Sure. First of all, I'm honored to have a Swedish audience. And I would love to come to Sweden at some point. And, I would say that I welcome feedback. So, I am not everywhere on social media. Like I said, I try to keep it, not a huge part of my life, but it's a necessary part. And so people can, write to me on Instagram. That's usually where I post most of the time. And I would love to hear feedback or recommendations or things that you want to hear more about or learn more about. Getting feedback from people is really important, because sometimes I don't know what people want to hear about or learn about. So I would appreciate that.
That's very true. And it's lovely to hear that you're open to hear from them. Good. Yeah. Thank you so much, Heather, for your time here today. I know that I dragged over the time, double up. So, Heather Moday, thank you very much for a lovely meeting today.
Thanks, Alexandra. It was wonderful. And this was actually the first time I got to do this with a foreign audience. So it's really special. Thank you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Is the Swedish book the first international book?
It is not. It's come out in the UK, and it's also in Spain and Germany. I think that's it. It is being published in several other countries, including Russia, which I'm very interesting to see that when it does come out. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Wonderful. I'm not surprised about Germany. They're very good in the holistic health aspect.
Yes, that's been published already. It's very exciting.
Very good. Well, I'm looking forward. It's coming in January, and we're super excited about it.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
You too. Bye.